Hello everyone, welcome to Ansarkari. So today we'll be taking up the newspaper for 19th April 2025. With the first article over here, the Andhra Pradesh SC sub-quotas and how will they work. So this article basically focuses on the Andhra Pradesh government's decision to implement sub-quotas within the scheduled caste. So this is to address the intra-group disparities, and it discusses the state's ordinance that divides the caste into four categories, which would help ensure a more equitable distribution of reservation benefits among historically marginalized communities. So, for example, we have the Madigas, who have long claimed that they are the more dominant scheduled caste communities like the Malas disproportionately benefit from the existing quota system. And this issue basically connects with Article 341 of the Constitution and judicial precedents such as the E.V. Chinnaya case, which had earlier ruled against such subcategorization. So, this article basically touches upon social justice, constitutional governance, and federal power, and it raises critical questions about the balance between equity in affirmative action and could be relevant case study when we talk about caste, reservation, or inclusive policy design. Then we have the next article over here, Smith Ricardo Trump. So this is regarding the free trade, which by either high duties or by absolute prohibition. So this basically explores the ideological shift in trade and economic policies, contrasting classical economists like Adam Smith, David Ricardo with modern political figures like Donald Trump and Joe Biden. While Smith and Ricardo, they championed free trade, market efficiency, and comparative advantage. Recent US policies, they reflect a return to protectionism, particularly in critical sectors when we talk such as semiconductors. And this narrative basically illustrates how globalization is being replaced by state-driven industrial strategies in response to geopolitical rivalries, especially between US and China. So this basically talks about economic policy evolution and the rationale behind strategic trade controls and supply chain nationalism. So apart from that, it includes data on the global semiconductor market. So we have Taiwan on the top with 56.7% of the share, South Korea, US, and even the company share. So it's basically regarding the semiconductor market only. And if maybe discuss about India's moves for semiconductor market, this maybe we can talk about initiatives such as Atmanirbhar Bharat, where we're talking about being self-reliant. तो उसमें semiconductor is an important market. उसके अलावा we have initiatives to help boost this sector or sectors which would help in Atmanirbhar like PLI schemes. Then we have the next article over here. In mess of his own making, Trump wants to fire chairman of Fed. So this basically covers a controversial development in the United States where former President Donald Trump he seeks to dismiss the Federal Reserve chairman Jerome Powell due to disagreements over interest rate decision. And this article basically talks about the growing tension between the executive and independent institutions like the central bank, which is critical for macroeconomic stability. So, this basically explains the potential risk of such interferences, especially concerning inflation targets, interest rate autonomy, and global financial credibility. So, apart from that, this article also opens discussions about institutional checks and balances, then a central bank independence, and also it could be taken as a lesson when we talk of India. So this is regarding in maintaining the RBI's autonomy as well. So over here we can also talk about, yeah, we can take this as a comparative governance insight. Then we have the next article, Kailash Mansarovar Yatra to resume soon. So this basically talks about the resumption of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which is a significant spiritual pilgrimage for Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains, which had been suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic and broader tensions with China. So this talks about two major routes. One is through Lippu Lake Pass in Uttarakhand, and the other is via Nathula in Sikkim. So basically, it talks about the administrative coordination by the Ministry of External Affairs and the involvement of security forces in this. So we can talk about the ITBP in this, which is the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, and this is article also talks about India's culture and geography, and even the details of route and border passes are highly relevant. So one is through Nathula over here, going through Sikkim, and the other is over here through the Lippu Lake Pass, involving 200 kilometers of trekking. Gold imports jump by $12.5 billion in financial year 25. So this article basically highlights significant development in India's external trade, where a sharp increase in gold imports by $12.5 billion in financial year 2024-25, despite record high international gold prices. So the gold prices they nearly surged by 33.78%, and India's gold imports in volume terms declined marginally by just 4.79%, which basically indicate that the demand remained largely resilient. And this trend underscores the cultural and economic importance of gold in the Indian household, where it functions not just as a jewelry but also as a store of value and an investment asset. So it contains the spike to policy discussion decisions, notably when we talk of reduction of import duties on gold from 15% to 6% in the union budget of July 2024, which likely made legal imports more attractive and was aimed at curbing smuggling. So, rising gold imports, especially when driven by price rather than volume, they have serious implications for India's current account deficit and foreign exchange reserves, as gold is a major contributor to the trade imbalance. So, this article also touches upon the global nature of gold price inflation, noting a global decline in gold jewelry demand, but with India showing greater resilience than China. So, it also talks about gold's rise to geopolitical uncertainty following Trump's re-election as US president, which triggered fears of protectionist trade policies. And so this article is important when we talk of external sector dynamics, fiscal policy, and investment behavior. And we can also talk about this when we talk about economics, cultural, and global politics. Government tweaks gas allocation policy for CNG, PNG. So the government of India, it has introduced a revised domestic natural gas allocation policy, which is aimed at ensuring the reliable and affordable supply of compressed natural gas for transportation, and PNGs, which is piped natural gas for domestic households. So this would be effective from first quarter of financial year 26, and gas allocation to city gas distribution companies will now be made 2 quarters in advance. So this change, it enhances supply visibility and planning efficiency for CGD entities, and it also follows recent challenges arising from reduction in the allocation of administered price mechanism gas, which led to pressure on margins and price hikes in the CNG sector. So this move, it basically ensures predictable and timely distribution of gas, which would help improve the market stability. And when we talk of the relevancy of this article, so it is relevant when we talk of energy security, natural resource management, policy interventions in public utilities, and it also ties into the environmental goals, such as promoting CNG usage aligns with India's push towards cleaner fuels and reduced carbon emissions under its sustainable development commitments. Then we have the next article, trade wars result of erosion of trust in the system. So this article presents a comprehensive analysis of the global trade tensions to the when we talk of IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, who identifies an erosion of trust in the multilateral system as a key reason behind escalating trade wars. So she talks of how globalization has historically lifted millions out of poverty, and the uneven distribution of its benefits has left many communities hollowed out as jobs moved overseas, triggering protectionist sentiment in many countries. So these developments have directly impacted India's performance with labor-intensive sectors such as gems, jewelry, and marine products facing a decline in the financial year 25. So sectors like IT are there grappling with reduced discretionary spendings in US and uncertainty around wage hikes due to tariff disruptions, and how tariff and non-tariff barriers distort trade flow and they harm smaller economies caught in the crossfire of major powers like the US, China, and the EU. So the rise in the US tariffs to historically high levels, retaliatory moves from other countries, and fears of Chinese dumping have all contributed to a breakdown of the rule-based trading order. So she basically calls for spending reforms in the US to reduce its debt and strengthen the macroeconomic stability. And she also recommends China to stimulate the domestic demand and reduce the industrial policy distortions. So even she talks of the European Union, she proposes a fiscal expansion, banking and capital markets union, and reforms which should help unlock the internal trade. So over here, a metaphor, trade is like water, captures the idea how trade will always find new pathways, but restrictions they create inefficiencies caused, and geopolitical spillovers. Fiberization slow in key cities as telcos face cost challenges. So over here we talk of the critical infrastructure bottleneck India faces in its digital transformation journey. Slow fiberization in urban centers like Mumbai and Kolkata, despite surging demand for high-speed data services and rapid 5G adoption. So, fiberization or the laying of underground optical fiber is essential for backhauling mobile signals and ensuring seamless 5G performance. So, exorbitant cost of fiber deployment, they pose serious financial challenges for the telecom providers, And the Telecom Right of Way Rules 2024, they keep one-time charges for fiber laying at rupees 10,000, and they basically allow for municipal bodies to determine restoration charges, and basically with opaque price mechanism, which has regulatory gray area leading to lack of enforcement and compliance, compelling providers to basically shifting to cost-effective alternative like street furniture for above-ground fiber deployment, which remains banned in many cities. And we can talk of the governance over here and federal coordination challenges in implementing national level infrastructure reforms at the local level, and it basically raises concerns over India's readiness for the digital economy, which has direct implications on success of 5G, rise of data centers, and Mumbai's role as a global internet gateway. So we can talk of urban governance, municipal finance, and digital infrastructure policy, how they must converge to enable the digital India vision. Then we have a Brahmin banker and a Muslim academic. So we over here we talk of C.D. Deshmukh, who was India's first Indian governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and Hamza Alvi, a young Muslim economist who later became a prominent academic. So we talk of their post-partition institutional continuity, cooperation, and foresight. How Deshmukh, despite his administrative and national responsibilities, played a pivotal role in ensuring the smooth functioning of Pakistan's nascent financial system under the Pakistan Monetary System and Reserve Bank Order of 1947, and RBI's temporary served as a central bank for Pakistan, which is an example of post-independence financial diplomacy. So, how Deshmukh personally mentored Alavi, diverting him from research into the operational training to meet Pakistan's urgent need for skilled financial personnel, and also Alavi's contributions, particularly in setting up exchange control operations in Pakistan's central bank, which showcases the importance of human capital transfer and institutional development in state building. So we talk of identity, trust, and cooperation across national and religious lines during a period of heightened communal tensions, making it, when we talk of nation building, secularism, cross-border legacy institutions. So it is also a powerful reminder how leadership is always grounded in professionalism and empathy can transcend political boundaries. Cascading effect. So China's recent export restrictions on rare earth elements, it basically highlights the vulnerabilities of the interconnected global supply chain and how these restrictions imposed as a countermeasure to US tariffs threaten industries worldwide, particularly in technology, automotive, and defense sectors, and how China controls significant share of these mining and processing, and it moves to halt exports could disrupt production for companies like Tesla, Apple, Lockheed Martin, leading to delays, higher cost, and shortage of products like EVs and smartphones. So it basically talks of global economy reliance on interconnected supply chain requires cooperation rather than escalation, urging nations, including India, to diversify their source to avoid further disruptions. Acquired Doer gets her due. The first woman to hold the post played a role in Air India's sale, added vigor to enforcement. So over here we're talking about Anuradha Thakur, who's a distinguished officer from the Indian Administrative Services, and how she made significant contributions throughout her career, particularly in economic and financial management. And she is set to become the first woman to occupy the position of secretary in Department of Economic Affairs in June 2025, and she's known for her humble yet thorough approach to decision making. And she's been instrumental in managing high profile projects such as the disinvestment of Air India, which helped reduce the airline's significant cost. And your stock offer in the Bharat Bond Exchange Traded Fund, which raised over 12,000 crore for public sector enterprises and strengthening the corporate enforcement, particularly through the Serious Fraud Investigation Office. And she's excelled in managing critical financial reforms, including the Prime Minister's internship scheme, which was aimed at bridging the gap between academic learning and industry demands. And her work in policy enforcement that strengthened India's economic institutions, including the Indian Corporate Law Service Academy. So she is an example when we talk of enforcement and policy making, navigating complex challenges like global trade tensions impacting India's economy, and basically her ability to drive significant changes in India's economic landscape. After 4 decades, an Indian astronaut set for space travel. So, Shubhanshu Shukla is set to embark on a historic space journey to the International Space Station next month as part of the Axiom 4 mission. So, this mission marks a significant milestone in India's space exploration efforts, coming 4 decades after Rakesh Sharma's iconic space flight in 1984 aboard Russia's Soyuz spacecraft. So he was selected under ISRO's Human Spaceflight Program and is one of the top contenders of the Gaganyaan mission. And his journey would basically help provide experience in operations, gravity adaptation, and emerging preparedness, which is very crucial for India's first manned space crewed mission. On a hilltop in Udhampur, a climate station with its head in the clouds. So, India recently inaugurated its first atmospheric monitoring station in Udhampur, Jammu and Kashmir, which is situated at about 2,200 meters above sea level. And this station is focused on studying ice nucleating particles, which plays an important role in cloud formation and precipitation, but are not fully understood. So basically, by studying how clouds form, particularly ice crystals and their impact on weather patterns like rainfall, snowfall, hail, the Udhampur station aims to fill a critical knowledge gap. So INPs, they include dust, soot, and biological particles, aiding for rapid formation of ice crystals in cloud, influencing precipitation. And also the high altitude facility. It offers real-time data collection in a remote, disturbance-free environment, which would help make it ideal for INP research and contribute to India's participation in the Global Atmospheric Watch Network, creating a standardized global data set on atmospheric processes. And also, the station is important due to its location in the Himalayan region, which is a key global climate hotspot. And it would provide continuous data on weather, air pollution, um, and precipitation patterns, which would basically enhance climate research. So, this is the collaboration between the Central University of Jammu and the Ministry of Earth Sciences. The Udhampur Climate Station is set to play a crucial role in advancing India's atmospheric science, particularly in understanding the dynamics of cloud behavior and precipitation in the Himalayan range. When governors act like central agents, how is use of Article 142 wrong or bad? So over here, the discussion of the use of Article 142 in the Indian Constitution was raised by Abhishek Manu Singhvi, and we talk of its application in specific cases where judicial powers intersect with constitutional provisions and the roles of other authorities like governors and the president. So, Article 142, it gives the Supreme Court the authority to pass any order necessary to do complete justice in a matter before it. So, this helps issuing directions which override existing laws or constitutional provision. And he argues how Article 142 is a legitimate and important tool for the judiciary to resolve issues which cannot be addressed through ordinary legal processes. So, however, concerns they arise when there is a perceived misuse or overextension of this power. When we talk of potential to undermine democratic processes or the balance of power along institutions. So basically, the use of Article 142 in such cases could be seen as encroaching on the powers of these constitutional officers and diminishing their authority. So the issue over here basically revolves around the perceived delay or indefinite holding of decisions by these officers, which could be detrimental to the functioning of the government and constitutional balance. And how the concerns with the use of Article 142 is not necessarily about its existence, but about the application in situations where it could overstep the bounds of established constitutional norms, particularly when it potentially impacts the autonomy of important constitutional offices or the federal structure. ISRO NASA mission NISAR may finally be launched in June. So we're here talking about the long-awaited NISAR, which is NASA ISRO's Synthetic Aperture Radar mission, which is a collaborative effort between the space agencies of India and the US, and it is expected to launch in June. So this satellite would conduct detailed observation of Earth's surface with the ability to capture changes small as 1 centimeter over time, and NISAR is particularly designed to study the dynamic processes such as glacier retreat, vegetation, and forest changes, also seismic activities like earthquakes and volcanoes. And it basically aims to provide valuable insights into climate change and natural hazards. Author William McKay Aitken, who made India his home after stopover in 59, dies. So he was a Scottish author who made India his home in 1959, and he passed away at the age of 19 in Dehradun on April 18. So he is known for his love for the Himalayas, and he became an Indian citizen in 1972, writing extensively about the region's politics, ecology, and monitoring. So, in top of his notable works, they include Nanda Devi Affair and Footloose in the Himalayas, which reflect his concerns about ecological degradation and the commercialization of monitoring. So he was critical of the government policies which harmed local ecosystem and culturals, and his writings have led to lasting impact on literature, environmental thought in India. Bhagavad Gita, Natya Shastra manuscripts enter UNESCO. So the manuscripts of Bhagavad Gita and Natya Shastra, they've been added to UNESCO's Memory of the World Register, which is a recognition of their significant cultural and philosophical value. So this basically brings the total number of Indian inscriptions in the register to 14. And Bhagavad Gita is a revered spiritual text which has been translated into around 80 languages. And Natya Shastra is basically a comprehensive treatise on theatre performance and classical arts. So, UNESCO's Memory of the World Register was established in 1992, and it basically aims to preserve and provide universal access to essential documentary heritage, with the latest inclusion highlighting India's rich cultural legacy.
वेरी गुड दिया जी। सांस भी ले लीजिए और थोड़ा हिंदी में ही बोलिए।
हाँ जी सर। Hindi and Urdu, A Tale of Twins. So over here, we're talking about the shared history and development of Hindi and Urdu, which are two languages evolving from common origin, but they've become distinct due to historical and political forces. So both the languages, they were part of the vernacular spoken in North India, and both of them, they go back to the pre-12th century times. Even with the arrival of the Turks in the 12th century and the establishment of Delhi Sultanate, it led to the integration of Persian and a new language जो emerge हुई थी, that was Dehlavi. And with time, this language evolved into Hindi. तो अगर हम मुगल एरा की बात करें तो इसमें जो पोएट्स थे जैसे जफर जिताली, दे बिगैन राइटिंग इन स्पोकन हिंदी, और उनने जो हिंदी लैंग्वेज थी उसमें पर्शियन वोकैबुलरी मिक्स कर दी थी फॉर लिटरेरी एक्सप्रेशन. और जब तक 18th सेंचुरी आई, द लैंग्वेज दैट बिकेम टू बी नोन एज उर्दू, विच वाज हिंदी हेविली इन्फ्लुएंस्ड बाय पर्शियन. तो उर्दू जो लैंग्वेज है वो ऑब्जॉर्व करती रही पर्शियन वर्ड्स, जो उसके एक रिच लिटरेरी ट्रेडिशन के बारे में आगे बात हुई. एंड उसके बाद 1900 में द ब्रिटिश अटेम्प्ट टू पर्ज उर्दू ऑफ पर्शियन वर्ड्स और रिप्लेसिंग देम विद संस्कृत वर्ड्स led to the formal distinction between Hindi and Urdu as separate languages. So over here, we're basically comparing the relationship between Hindi and Urdu to identical twins. Matlab, they're distinct in many ways, but fundamentally they're the same when we talk of their core or their roots. So they have the same linguistic heritage with shared grammar and basic sound. So this is seen as a historical and political mistake and not a linguistic necessity. Indian electronics companies to figure out alternatives. So Indian electronics manufacturing sector is looking for alternatives to source rare earth metals and magnets, which are currently dominated by China. And recently, China suspended exports of several critical elements such as gallium, germanium, and antimony, which are essential for products ranging from smartphones to missiles. And even as my Union IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, he expressed confidence how the Indian industry, along with global efforts to diversify supply chains since the COVID-19 pandemic, will find alternatives. And how, although China is leading in processing of these metals, countries like Japan, they've also made efforts to revive their processing industries. So, how India's electronic sector growth, which is bolstered by government initiatives such as the 23,000 crore subsidy scheme for electronic components manufacturing over the past decade, how India's production has surged, और जो हमारे exports and they've surpassed rupees 3.25 lakh crore also. Then we have the last article for today. India plans to ease nuclear liability laws to attract foreign firms. So, इसमें we're talking about how India plans to ease its nuclear liability, which would help attract foreign firms, particularly when we talk of US companies like General Electric Westinghouse, which has hesitated to engage due to the risk of unlimited exposure to accident-related penalties, and how the proposed amendments are set to be discussed in the monsoon session of the parliament, which would cap the compensation operators can seek from suppliers and in the event of an accident. So these changes are part of India's broader strategy to expand its nuclear power capacity significantly by 2047 and aiming for 100 gigawatt of nuclear energy. So when we talk of these amendments, they play a key role in trade negotiations with the US, which would boost bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030, and how the existing 2010 nuclear liability law, which was originally influenced by the 1984 Bhopal gas strategy, is seen as a major hurdle for foreign suppliers and how these changes are expected to alleviate these concerns. So this was it for today. Thank you, everyone.